Welcome to this latest episode of the In Conversation podcast, the show where we deep dive into the lives and work of cultural trailblazers, artists, and thinkers shaping how we see the world. I'm your host today, as always, James Campbell, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Sofia Vranou, scholar, writer, and the author of a compelling new book on the legendary Leigh Bowery, published by Intellect. So from outrageous performance art to subversive fashion, Bowery remains an icon of creativity and provocation. Sophia's work not only explores his legacy, but also reimagines what it means to study a figure like Bowery today. So do settle in. We're about to peel back some of the sequins and dig into the stories behind the spectacle. Sofia, welcome to In Conversation. It's wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you for your time. How's it going?
Hi, James. Thank you for having me.
And where are you calling in from today?
Well, I'm calling from London.
Okay, and I'm in Washington, D.C. I wanted to kick things off, though, by maybe asking if you could share one of your favorite sort of stories or anecdotes about Leigh Bowery. Any memories of Leigh? Maybe something that really captures who he was for our listeners.
I don't have any memories of Leigh, of course, because I've never met him. What's a really intriguing story about Leigh Bowery is his performance at the Fridge Club in Brixton for an AIDS benefit, during which he notoriously sprayed the audience with an enema. So the original plan of the performance involved Leigh having a water fountain out of his arse, but that didn't work. Well, allegedly, he douched the audience with a brown stinking mess. This is very typical of Leigh Bowery, actually, who was bold and outrageous and unapologetic and provocative.
It sounds like it. That's certainly a great anecdote to get things started. Hearing that one reminds me of some of the other work that we've published in recent years around people like Ron Athey as well and other provocateurs. Well, thank you for sharing that one. And when did you personally first encounter like Leigh Bowery? How did you come across Leigh Bowery as like an icon, a figure, and Leigh's work?
I think it must have been now like 10 years ago when I was browsing a book. It's called The Artist's Body, edited by Tracy Ware. Mm-hmm. And I came across a short passage about Bowery's performance at the Anthony Doffe Gallery, which actually is his only solo performance in an institutional space. I was very interested and intrigued by this nightclub creature who entered the art world. And I remember I tried to find more information about him, and I didn't come across any academic articles or books. And of course, his biography written by his close friend, Sue Tilley.
Well, when I first encountered your book, I hadn't really heard of Leigh Bowery, to be honest with you. So I again did a deep dive, and it wasn't such a deep dive, like I encountered the biography. And then I also quite quickly found lots on YouTube, and there's some really cool like interviews and some kind of iconic moments there, whether in the club or on the Clove Show, which I know some of maybe our older UK viewers will remember the Clove Show. And there's a couple of really interesting interviews and sort of showcases of Leigh Bowery on there. But for people who are listening and maybe they haven't encountered Leigh, could you just tell us a little bit more about who Leigh Bowery was and why he's such an icon, beyond the enemas and the provocations and all of that stuff? But what was he kind of famous for, and how did he get his start in the scene and in the culture in London?
It's very hard to pinpoint Leigh Bowery's work because he was a multifaceted artist. For me, he was first and foremost a performance artist, an avant-garde costume designer, and a visual provocateur. I think he's mostly celebrated as a fashion designer, and he's mostly remembered as a nightclub icon. He ran his legendary Club Night Taboo in London in 1985. Some people know him from his collaboration with the Michael Clark Dance Company.
Yeah.
And he was a muse for British painter Lucian Freud.
Thank you for sharing that. And of course, one of the people involved in the book, you managed to get a foreword from Boy George, and I guess like Boy George and Leigh Bowery were contemporaries and kind of scenester icons of the time. That must have been great to have got that foreword from someone like Boy George.
Oh yeah, that was beyond any expectation, to be honest with you. It's true that they were friends and they shared a mutual admiration. And of course, Leigh Bowery designed some of the early career outfits of Boy George.
Ah, right. Okay, that's really cool. That's interesting to know. Are there any favorite pieces, whether they be costumes or performances, that you associate with Bowery that you personally most enjoy, that you return to often? Anything maybe you'd highlight for our audience that they might want to go and try and find some more information about?
Well, for me, I think the most interesting performance was his so-called birth performance, and especially the one he performed at Wigstock, which was a drag festival that ran annually in downtown New York.
Okay.
And involved many drag queen acts in sequined outfits, lip syncing. And then Bowery appears in a very modest outfit, a face mask that totally disfigured his face. Mm-hmm. And he looked huge. So he went on stage, and after a few minutes of terrible singing of All You Need Is Love by the Beatles, he just laid back on a table and started shaking his legs. And much to the astonishment of the spectators, a woman appeared in between his legs, like he gave birth to her. It was his friend and collaborator, Nicola Bateman, who was hidden underneath his costume the whole duration of the performance. And she was supported in a very awkward position with a harness.
I bet.
This is one of the most famous performances of Leigh Bowery and Nicola Bateman, which they performed numerous times with their band Mindy. But for me, the most spectacular was the one at Wigstock, which is captured in a documentary about this drag festival.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that. I did want to ask a little bit about yourself as well. So this book is ultimately your developed dissertation, right? Is that right? Was it your PhD?
Yes, exactly. The book developed from my PhD thesis at Queen Mary University of London.
And how did you end up focusing on Leigh Bowery and getting into this kind of performance art work? What's your sort of background and your research interests more generally?
Well, I have a background in history of art and visual culture, and a strong interest in queer performance art and actually marginal histories of performance art. And Leigh Bowery's example was perfect for a research project, because as I said earlier, his work had not been critically explored in the past. So it was fertile ground to make a contribution to knowledge. And then what surprised me actually is that more than that, it provided many opportunities to enter urgent contemporary discourses surrounding normativity and the body, difference, queerness, feminism, Orientalism, freak studies, very pressing contemporary issues.
You've definitely created a really important work, that's for sure. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you kind of developed from a dissertation into this fine book, which is, of course, going to be kind of almost more like an exhibition catalogue as well as a critical reflection. So it certainly isn't a PhD anymore, that's for sure. You've definitely developed it. How was that process? Did you find that difficult to kind of edit and develop from the PhD thesis into a publishable book, or did you find that to be an enjoyable process?
To be honest, I didn't change much from the PhD, but of course, the PhD addresses an academic audience. It is a research for the supervisor and the examiner. And of course, you have to make certain changes to make the text more accessible, perhaps, for a wider audience. Although it is, of course, an academic study, and I have to say that it is the first academic book dedicated entirely to Leigh Bowery's practice. However, I wanted to reach a wider readership.
And I think you've certainly done that. And I should say congratulations, because, of course, we just had a big order from the Tate this week, and the book will be stocked in their bookshop, which is fantastic news, and well deserved. But that's also part of I suppose, a broader exposition of Leigh Bowery, because the Tate, they've recently, and they have an ongoing exhibition on Leigh Bowery and Bowery's work, right? Which I believe you were there for the opening of that. How did that pan out? How's the exhibition?
I think it's a great show, and the curators have done excellent work. And I know that they approached many people who knew Leigh Bowery, his friends, collaborators, but also people who researched his work, including myself, I have to say. And they tried to illuminate his practice as a whole. So you see a variety of material in this exhibition, from ephemera, photographs, his costumes, other garments, videos. As I said earlier, Leigh Bowery was a very complex artist. He kind of operated outside disciplinary grid, we could say. So he avoided a specific medium. And this is perhaps one of the reasons that his work escaped criticism, perhaps. It was not easily to label his work and categorize it. Something that he desired, of course, as he famously said, if you label me, you negate me. So this is what they tried to do at the Tate show. They tried to really present every aspect of his complicated personality, and they did a great job. And of course, the opening, I think Leigh Bowery would love the opening. It was more like a huge party with hundreds of people, very flamboyantly attired.
Yeah.
And for me, the highlight, of course, was meeting with Boy George face to face and eventually having a chat, because he provided a foreword for my book, and I'm so grateful about that.
Yeah, big thank you to Boy George for doing that, and a wonderful addition to a fine book it is too. So I'm really glad that you were able to be there at the launch of the exhibition as well. Let's talk a little bit about audience, though, because it sounds like Leigh touched many different people in different ways. But who do you see the audience for this book being? Is it, you've mentioned it's kind of partly academic, but it's also written for more of a general reader or someone who's more interested in just these figures, performance art figures. But is that fair to say? Who would you say the audience for this work is?
Well, it is certainly for academics and scholars and people who are interested in queer visual culture and performance studies. But of course, as I said, I wanted to reach a wider audience. So it's for everyone who is intrigued by Bowery's work and they want to explore more through a critical lens, not just a description for all the projects, but what they do and how they speak to us at the present moment. And this is why I think, and what I really like in general in other academic books, and I try to do in my case, is to actually avoid unnecessary jargon, if you like, to make the book accessible.
I congratulate you, because I think you have done a very good job of that. Pardon me. I do find the book very easy to read and accessible, and it covers a lot of ground, which leads me to my next question, really, is like, how did you approach such an interdisciplinary and unique topic? What was your kind of methodology, and what kinds of materials were you working with? How did you kind of approach it?
Well, my methodology included archival research. Of course, I visited his estate, which is held here in England. That was very convenient. And through oral histories from collaborators and friends and people who knew him. And of course, because research for me is an alive process, then the more I immersed myself in Leigh Bowery's work, various themes emerged that I could explore further and unpack.
I wanted to ask you what you thought maybe were Leigh Bowery's lasting legacy. What was Bowery's lasting legacy, whether in art, fashion, performance, or queer culture more generally? What's to you, after doing all of this research and being immersed in Bowery and Bowery's work, do you feel is the legacy that left behind?
What they often say about live art is that it is a practice that blurs art and life. So this is something that Bowery really took to extremes. So beyond his contribution to the art discourse and narratives of performance art, I think his greatest legacy is visible in our world, in a new generation of queer people who want to explore their identity and explore with subjectivities unapologetically. So I guess that his greatest contribution revolves around queer visibility.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And talking about sharing, I understand you might have prepared a brief extract from the book. If you don't mind, this would be a great opportunity for you to share that extract with us, if you wouldn't mind reading us something from the book.
That would be great.
Thank you.
I will read a small extract from the introduction that actually connects with your last question about his legacy. Because Leigh Bowery's work was first appreciated in the fashion discourse, and it's actually more than that. So I write in the introduction, the mastery of the fine balance between fashion and art that Bowery attained is rare, if not unique, among artists of his generation. He has been variously described as outrageous, beautiful, genius, terrifying, and sick. But it is the words of fellow club freak and collaborator Boy George, for whom Bowery designed some of his early career outfits that seem to most vividly capture his unsettling presence when the latter famously described him as modern art on legs. As compelling and accurate as this might sound, in underlining the fact that Bowery's perpetual costuming is foremost a form of performative art that extends beyond the confines of the gallery, it also hints as a possible explanation as to why he has remained a marginal and slippery figure when it comes to the absorption of his work into dominant art narratives. The ephemerality, complexity, and mobility of Bowery's practice, which embraced pop sensibilities and was for the most part exercised in subcultural or unconventional settings like nightclubs, constitute the main factors of its difficulty in being accepted and treated as an important art form. This is the case with many so-called underground artists, from Genesis P. Orridge and Campbell Fowler to Joanna Wendt and David Hoyle, whose distinctive practice developed outside institutional art spaces and the disciplinary grid, encompassing a wide range of cultural influences and expressions that for the most part remained inaccessible to the restrained sphere of high art. Bowery's costumes, nevertheless, many of which have been extensively documented by photographer Fergus Greer, were chiefly appreciated in fashion discourse for their strong impact, bold shapes, innovative vision, and craftsmanship, despite the fact that they were never conceived as fashion, at least in the typical sense, but as strictly personal performative devices. Bowery is perhaps the only performance artist who is widely labeled as such, but he is particularly celebrated as a designer, and relatively very little has been critically explored about his performances. It almost feels like his costumes, the surviving relics of his idiosyncratic practice, have turned into autonomous artifacts whose powerful brilliance has overshadowed their performative purpose. So this is what my book does, basically.
That's wonderful.
light to his less known performances, in most of them in non-institutional spaces. His non-theatrical performances, I mean, not his work with the Michael Clark Company.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That was wonderful and very well read, very engaging. And I think you did a wonderful job of really showcasing how engaging the work is. So thank you very much for that. And again, thank you so much for your time today, but I'm not going to let you go quite yet because I wanted to move on from Leigh Bowery and just ask you a few what I call quick fire questions. So just to learn a little bit more about you. So these are kind of all over the place and just needs a quick answer from you basically. So I'm going to start with some music questions. So I was wondering, do you have any favorite albums or a particular favorite album maybe that you like to listen to if you're working in the studio or you're writing or just, you want to let your hair down?
I don't really have a favorite album, and I listen to different kinds of music depending on my mood. But the only music I can listen to while studying is classical music, of course, because it's soothing. I guess my favorite has to be Chopin's Nocturnes. This is what I listen to usually. I love them.
My wife actually does the same thing. She loves Chopin for working. Something about Chopin definitely kind of soothes the mind and lets you engages you, but also lets you kind of get into the work you're doing. It's an interesting one. Thank you for sharing that with us. And now moving on to kind of other cultural things that from your childhood. Can you remember a particular film that that you used to go back to all the time? I think for me it was The Never-Ending Story.
That might be a bit embarrassing, but I loved Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
I was in love with him when I was a child. I don't know, for some perverted reason.
Any particular films that stand out from the Stallone oeuvre?
Oh, well, I love, of course, all the Rocky films.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're not the only one who had a crush on Stallone as a child. I mean, come on, I think a lot of us did. Yeah, I mean, yes, Rocky is like a classic franchise. So no, another great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Nothing to be embarrassed about there. That's why these questions are so fun, because you get weird answers that people might not anticipate or expect. So thank you for being honest. That's a good one. And I wanted to ask you also about there's particular decades and eras throughout history that have been famous for creativity, whether it be modernism or, different other eras where, fashion, art, design, creativity and culture have been at the fore. Is there any particular periods that you are fascinated with? Any that kind of jump out to you that you find really engaging or that you just love the creativity from that period?
I'm all about postmodernism. Mm-hmm. So I have to say that especially the 60s and the 80s are the decades that I find the most interesting in terms of art production and fashion and design. The 70s are interesting, but they are a bit too political for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would go with the 60s and the 80s.
Cool. And what is it about postmodernism in general that draws you to it as a way of thinking about the world?
Well, I think it was a radical break with tradition, and especially in art. And it opened new avenues of exploring art that disengaged from purely aesthetic criteria and allowed work that conversed with social matters like feminism, you name it, race, gender, discrimination in general.
No, great. Thank you very, very much. And then moving on from that, I was wondering if there's any particular theory or theorist or writer who might have had an influence on your own writing and research. Any big influences on your own work?
You mean from the writers I explored?
Any particular, anyone who basically inspires you or has had an impact on your own writing and your own sort of research. It could be a theorist or a particular theory. Anything that kind of you really engage with over the years.
Well, I find really intriguing Donna Haraway's work on the cyborg.
Okay,
and this is something that I touch on. in relation to Leigh Bowery's embodiments.
Yeah, okay. That's really cool. That's one of the things which is nice about this round of questions as well, is that hopefully people get a glimpse into you and your life and your practice, but also then there's a few things that they can take away and go and read for themselves and kind of immerse themselves in. So thank you for sharing that as well. And I've got the last one for me today is, what's your greatest fear?
My greatest fear?
Yeah.
Death, isn't it? For most people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's mine, to be honest with you, yeah. Well, Sophia, thank you very much for joining me in the quick time questions, as well as for joining me today to discuss Leigh Bowery and, of course, your wonderful book. And that's it for today's episode. So a huge thank you to Sophia for joining us and sharing such rich insights into the world of Leigh Bowery. If you're curious to learn more, you can grab a copy of her book, which is available at the Tate, from other select retailers, of course. And of course, you can just go to intellectbooks.com and grab a copy of that. But also keep an eye out for Sophia and her work at any other forthcoming events and various different talks as always. And as always, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And if anyone else out there has done too, please do share this with other people. Feel free to rate, review, and share with as many people as you think might be interested. So thanks again, Sophia, and I'll see the rest of you for the next episode of In Conversation.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure.